G'day legends, I hope you are having a fantastic Wednesday and hump day to the week, that you are slowly but surely grinding along through the week. Now today's video is going to be a lot shorter than usual, and I know I always promise this, but I've got multiple interviews this afternoon leading into this evening, which I think you will find very interesting. But today I am working on short time. So mainly we're going to talk about new weapons to Ukraine, Tucker Carlson, and of course then a look at the maps in the end if you'd like to look at this. Over our last few videos, we have spoken about that Tucker Carlson seems to be in Russia, specifically Moscow, and that he plans to interview President Putin, which he has before speculated that he would like to interview Putin. Of course, this has sent the online community into a frenzy in both support and against. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, but also this is going to be absolutely massive. As we know, Twitter is massive. It's owned by Elon Musk, and Elon Musk before has shared things of Tucker's, and of course this is going to be no different. Now this has only been up for a few hours, and let's look at the sort of engagement that this is getting. And 5 hours, 33.3 million is absolutely massive. If this was YouTube, if YouTube would actually allow this, then this would be trending as #1. We've also seen that Elon has reshared this, as well as Robert F. Kennedy has said mainstream media journalists have interviewed Putin many times before. The only difference now is that they can't control the narrative. Zelensky has been given numerous primetime interviews. Osama bin Laden has been interviewed before. We have a right to hear from everyone, no matter how you feel personally about them. And this is what we're going to talk about before we look over the full video. Personally, I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with what Tucker is doing as a journalist, as a reporter in now the new social media sphere of where his reporting has come away from Fox. I myself, I've copped a hell of a lot of criticism, of course, to a lesser degree than Tucker will of this, but by interviewing Russian soldiers, as well as a member of Russia's Wagner PMC. And of course, like myself, this opens you up to real world threats against you. And of course, Tucker is playing at a much higher stakes table than I am. So of course, these threats will open up behind closed doors publicly as well. And it'll be interesting to see maybe the fallout of this. But this is just on a huge scale, I guess, of what I try and do with my interviews. And you can find yourself in these in a bit of a precarious position as the interviewer because of the thin line that sits between adding perspective and falling into the realm of spreading propaganda. And don't think for a second that there isn't propaganda in interviews on both sides of the coin. It's just we see one more than the other. George Monastirikos, who's a fellow at the Geneva Center for Security, has published this piece talking about this interview. Traveling to Moscow to intend to interview a dictator like Putin in the year 2024 is similar to visiting Berlin in 1940 to speak to Adolf Hitler. We're going to speak on that in a second. America wasn't officially at war with Nazi Germany, but it was possible. Some might even say inevitable, given Washington's diplomatic and military support for Great Britain. To pro-Russian Republicans, that's just journalism, because it's important to hear both sides of the story. Now, I believe hearing both sides of any story is important, and that is what journalists need to do, but also journalists need to wade through propaganda as well to evaluate sides and say this is what the truth actually is. And never in time have we had more openness to media through social media. Anyone can be a journalist, anyone can have an opinion, but that makes it even harder then to wade through the huge, massive amounts of propaganda that are also released by those with obvious intentions and sometimes lesser obvious. And I know this is going to piss a lot of people off, but comparing Putin to Hitler and the Russian army to Nazis, this is done all the time, but I do think that this is ridiculous. And the comparison we see just as much is Putin to Hitler, Putin to Stalin, and to Mao. And Putin is by no means a saint, absolutely far from it. He's responsible for many horrible things. But on those comparisons, just look at the ideology, the history, the statistics of these, and very quickly you'll see that the comparison actually it doesn't make Putin look worse. It actually lessens the crimes against humanity and the genocide that these leaders cause. I think to compare to Hitler in this case, and that we see this done all the time, or Russia to the SS, I think is a ridiculous stretch that people will try and make work more and more, along with the dehumanization, say, of calling their Russian soldiers orcs. I'm not saying they're in the right, but I'm saying look at this as a whole of two separate occasions, and you'll see that there are some significant differences between the two. And even then, if a Western journalist did go and interview Hitler, how would that go down? I'm unsure. Very different time of the world. And of course, we don't have social media. Then we didn't have the amount of speculation from individuals as well. But it's a comparison which, of course, people will draw again and again. And I think there are other leaders absolutely more comparable that people don't want to compare to because they are walking around free in Western countries. So let's look at actually what Tucker has posted on X, on Twitter, that has gone incredibly viral, saying that we're in Moscow
tonight. We're here to interview the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. We'll be doing that soon.
So we actually don't know exactly when this is going to take place, but we are thinking the hype will build for a few days and then it will be released on his website.
There are risks to conducting an interview like this, obviously. So we've thought about it carefully over many months. Here's what we're doing.
So there are risks to this. Now, of course, there are American journalists in Russian prisons right now. One of the things, Russia does not have very great freedom of press at all on the World Index scale. But I will point out as well, as you know, we're being fair in these, neither does Ukraine. I should say as well, there are real threats towards journalists in Russia as well, real threats. We've seen killed, locked up, whatever. And in Ukraine as well, being a journalist, I have had real threats against me also.
First, because it's our job. We're in journalism. Our duty is to inform people. 2 years into a war that's reshaping the entire world, most Americans are not informed. They have no real idea what's happening in this region.
One, in this, it's not just because interviews like this are shut down. One, it's very confusing exactly what's happened. And now that we're years into this and Israel are kicked off, the further impact from there, it has fallen out of the mainstream media as well.
Here in Russia or 600 miles away in Ukraine.
But there's also another piece in this that I'll say that Ukraine has let in Western journalists. Russia on the whole has not let in Western journalists. As you know, I applied for accreditation and was denied in Russia. I was accepted in Ukraine. So this is why a lot of those mainstream, or basically all the mainstream, is in Ukraine. It's much easier to work.
They should know. They're paying for much of it.
Referring to the tax
in ways
money.
They might not fully yet perceive. The war in Ukraine is a human disaster. It's left hundreds of thousands of people dead, an entire generation of young Ukrainians, and it's depopulated the largest country in Europe. But the long-term effects are even more profound. This war has utterly reshaped the global military and trade alliances, and the sanctions that followed have as well.
So here, talking about those trade alliances, we're talking countries like, most importantly, China, we're talking Iran, and of course, we're talking about BRICS versus NATO. Now, BRICS is an economic alliance, not a military alliance or a defensive alliance like NATO, but it has drawn that, as people say, the rise of the global south, it has drawn those countries closer together than ever before. And of course, like you'll say here, taking down America's dominance.
They have upended the world economy. The post-World War II economic order, the system that guaranteed prosperity in the West for more than 80 years, is coming apart very fast, and along with it, the dominance of the U.S. dollar. These are not small changes. They are history-altering developments. They will define the lives of our grandchildren. Most of the world understands this perfectly well. They can see it. Ask anyone in Asia or the Middle East what the future looks like. And yet the populations of the English-speaking countries seem mostly unaware. They think that as nothing has really changed. And they think that because no one has told them the truth. So
as we hear from right or left wing, either journalists or politicians, that this war is much larger than just Ukraine, Russia. We'll be told that if we don't send money in, that eventually it's World War III, and then it's going to be American, Australian, British, European soldiers fighting Russia at one point. On the other hand, we have these economic sanctions, which are causing harm to many nations, including our own, and of course, targeted at places like Russia. But that ripple is being felt.
Their media outlets are corrupt. They lie to their readers and viewers.
They lie.
And they do that mostly by omission. For example, since the day the war in Ukraine began, American media outlets have spoken to scores of people from Ukraine, and they've done scores of interviews with Ukrainian President Zelensky. We ourselves have put in a request for an interview with Zelensky, and we hope he accepts.
So right there, this is where I see no problem in this. Tucker is also prepared to go and speak to President Zelensky, and of course brings up a good point. There are hundreds of interviews with Zelensky, with other officials, other leaders, and of course they will be picked and chosen and used as a piece for propaganda, and of course putting out to the West to try and get more aid in as well. I'm not saying that Putin is not going to use this for propaganda, but as long as you're willing to talk to both sides, I see that as putting you sort of in the green.
But the interviews he's already done in the United States are not traditional interviews. They are fawning pep sessions specifically designed to amplify Zelensky's demand that the U.S. enter more deeply into a war in Eastern Europe and pay for it. That is not journalism. It is government propaganda.
Someone asked me in my Telegram about what was my view on sending over questions like for Q&A style interviews. Now, personally, I agree here with Tucker. That is propaganda if you're doing that. If you have like a pre-scripted interview that looks like an interview, but it's not, it's to shape a message somewhere. As an interviewer who's done many interviews, it's not uncommon to send over like questions, but the questions I always send are, this is what I want to ask about. These will not be the questions that I ask, but it will be in line to give you an idea and start thinking about things I may ask, especially for like technical aspects of it. But I'm not just going to answer this question, bang, bang, bang. So then we have a scripted answer. Now, of course, that can be different if I'm asking someone something specific on technical aspects in the interview, say this afternoon, where I'm asking about legalities and law with a lawyer. I may have questions pre-done so you can actually look up that and give maybe an answer. But when it's in an interview with something like this, an official, a soldier, then no. I have maybe an outline that I'll send them, but not this whole just scripted bloody interview.
Propaganda of the ugliest kind, the kind that kills people. At the same time, our politicians and media outlets have been doing this, promoting a foreign leader like he's a new consumer brand. Not a single Western journalist has bothered to interview the president of the other country involved in this conflict, Vladimir Putin.
Which right there is a concern. But also, has other journalists reached out and not agreed to maybe the terms of it? And we don't exactly know the terms of this interview, where the questions are pre-submitted. We don't really know. But Tucker is saying that this will be live, unedited, complete conversation. Be interesting to see how it actually unfolds.
Most Americans have no idea why Putin invaded Ukraine or what his goals are now. They've never heard his voice. That's wrong. Americans have a right to know all they can about a war that they're implicated in.
And I will add with that, yeah, they don't publish much of what Putin says. You need to go to places like Al Jazeera to actually find that. And even like the Kremlin website where they post the transcripts of what he says can actually be very, very difficult to get onto from places like Australia's internet. And you have to go through VPNs and whatever to actually find it, to translate it and to put it across, which I see as an issue as myself being a journalist, where I want to see what is said, even if I'm not saying I believe it, but to get that, it is definitely censored.
And we have the right to tell them about it because we are Americans too. Freedom of speech is our birthright. We were born with the right to say what we believe. That right cannot be taken away no matter who is in the White House. But they're trying anyway. Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news media. They did this in order to stop a Putin interview that we were planning.
So that is what we were talking about right in the beginning, that he had planned this for a long time. I actually mentioned this yesterday, that I believed it was going, but then it was held up somewhere.
Last month, we're pretty certain they did exactly the same thing once again. But this time, we came to Moscow anyway. We are not here because we love Vladimir Putin. We are here because we love the United States. And we want it to remain prosperous and free. We paid for this trip ourselves. We took no money from any government or group. Nor are we charging people to see the interview. It is not behind a paywall. Anyone can watch the entire thing, shot live to tape and unedited, on our website, tuckercarlson.com. Elon Musk, to his great credit, has promised not to suppress or block this interview once we post it on his platform, X, and we're grateful for that. Western governments, by contrast, will certainly do their best to censor this video on other less principled platforms because that's what they do. They are afraid of information they can't control. But you have no reason to be afraid of it. We are not encouraging you to agree with what Putin may say in this interview, but we are urging you to watch it. You should know as much as you can. And then, like a free citizen and not a slave, you can decide for yourself.
So I see no problem with showing both sides of what is actually happening and to try and get an idea. And it would be fantastic if Tucker, in line with this, can then speak to Zelensky. There has been some criticism about how hard-hitting are the questions Tucker is going to actually be able to ask Putin. But of course, the Kremlin, Putin, they will see this as a propaganda opportunity. And this is where Tucker needs to, tread lightly. He's a very good interviewer. Whether you love or hate him, he is a good interviewer. And to actually sort of maneuver and step around some of that and get the answers of which he may be looking for or that people want to hear. But Tucker thrives in controversy. Journalists like this, they thrive in that. Controversy makes clicks and clicks make money. The impressions I saw before of 30 million YouTubers, and I'm not sure on X, but they can earn anywhere, or in Australia, maybe $3 to $5 per 1,000 views, and sometimes in America, much more near 10 to 15, depending on your content. Don't think that this hasn't had millions and millions and millions of clicks and is making so much money. This will be one of the biggest interviews of the year, if not in history, this sort of podcast style interview that we then see. And my question is, would people be more upset or less upset if a liberal type interviewer was actually conducting this with Putin? And I'd say that they'd be far less upset, that it's upset actually with Tucker doing it, who they see as a pro-Russian propagandist, although I would disagree with that as a whole, because I think to be branded that is you have any differing opinion from the most bloody pro-Ukrainian stance ever. If ever any differing opinion from that, instantly you apparently work for the Kremlin. And I think that is actually outcasting a lot of just real discussion about what is actually happening here. But it will be interesting, and maybe this will open the door for more interviews from other media outlets as well. And if the media outlets see that this is a massive story, trust me, they'll be lining up to do it for the Kremlin as well as the mainstream media dies. Now, on the 7th of February, which is today in Australia, in the kilometres world, and tomorrow where the NASCAR people live in the US, it is forecast that a vote in the Senate, and part of this, of course, is the bill for $60 billion to Ukraine, as well as more border measures. Now, there is no line how critical this is for the war, as the US is currently out of money for Ukraine using the presidential drawdown funds, and Ukraine has a massive shell starvation. And America basically has an open southern border currently. This bill has been stuck in Congress since October, and it has been revised multiple times. But again, basically the same bill is being presented. You don't need to be a rocket science to say, well, if it went down there, it's probably going to go down again. And the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has stated yesterday, we have no real chance here to make a law. And Senate Minority John Thune has said, I would expect that the notion to proceed to the bill will fail. Now, even if the bill can make it through the House, then House Speaker Mike Johnson has the ability to block it from advancing in the House further, and he'll be looking at who specifically has voted for this to move forwards. Of course, none of us have a crystal ball, but there are doubts from both sides about whether this will actually get passed. And House Speaker Mike Johnson has said it will be dead on arrival. Macron from France has warned that Europe must be ready, saying, we must be ready to act and defend and support Ukraine, whatever it takes and whatever America decides. So if America decides to pull out, then of course Europe will have to plug that gap. Europe is already well behind on its shell donations to Ukraine, and it's well known that Europe cannot plug the hole that America would leave if they were to withdraw their funding. Putin and Zelensky, of course, will be on the edge of their seats awaiting the arrival of this decision. And just today, the standalone Israel bid of $17.6 billion in military funding has failed in the House. We're waiting to see Ukraine's newest piece of acquired military hardware, the ground-launched small diameter bomb, or the GLSDB, on the front line. Now, technically, the GLSDB is a new weapon that began mass production in 2023, but it is using other older parts. It's a bit of a Frankenstein weapon. It's a precision-guided 250-pound bomb attached to then an M26 rocket, which both have been separately used for decades. These are fired from HIMARS systems, the M270 multiple launch rocket system, and it even has its own like shipping container launcher thing. And with these weapons, say like the ATACMS, the Switchblade, even the HIMARS system to an extent, have had an initial huge effect on the front line, but has seemingly faded into just the vast array of other weapons fairly quickly. Now, there's a few reasons for this. Maybe it is that Russia is improving defenses against these weapons, which is likely, but it's also the cost and quantity of these high-tech weapons, which is always a battle. And we've seen that this is where the West is failing Ukraine, the troops in the front line, and itself. We're failing just on the dumb bombs. We've got the smart bombs, but we don't have the dumb bombs. Shells for 155, the mortars, and for too long, we've been focused on high-tech billion-dollar contracts for R&D and development that we forgot that in war, ultimately, we just need millions upon millions of bullets and bombs. And one of the big indicators of this, we see Ukraine cut open cluster munitions to use then for their drones in a much simpler and cost-effective way. And of course, what we're seeing is Ukraine is running out of these dumb weapons. They're running out of mortars and shells. And Russia is the same. And Russia has got that from North Korea now funding in as well. And to be honest, we as the West, we're sort of lucky we found this out in a much smaller conflict, because in a much larger international style war, we would have run out in weeks, not after 2 years. Of course, there's still reserve, but we are failing to meet basically any of the targets set forward for production of shells and mortars. Now, of course, we're going to have a quick look at the maps here. Of course, this is Ukraine and the capital of Kyiv. These areas with the sort of grey outline is what has been taken since 22, and with the red outline since 14, this being Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. Now, where we're going to come into, where the most speaking about is Avdiivka, and have a look exactly what is happening down in here. And as we can see, that Russia continues its advancement here and crushing down on Avdiivka, with some commentators today saying that it is now time for Ukraine to withdraw from Avdiivka, although there's probably still many months left of fighting and grinding away at human tragedy happening in here. But let's scroll back and see where these moves are made. Now, this map was updated 7 hours ago, but tends to be very conservative with when it updates for the days prior. We don't have a deep state. They haven't updated today, but we do have Syriac to check these against. And in the north, does align with basically whatever else we have seen, and this movement into these northern blocks and expansion out to the west from that. More, if so, actually more than we see on the deep state yesterday, as well as this movement from the east heading west in and expanding controls out from up near here as well. Now, we saw yesterday, the reason we know that Russia is in here is we did see this Bradley attacking in here that was then abandoned by its crew after hitting a mine. If you'd like to see the video, I'll put that then on my Telegram channel. Now, let's have a look at Avdiivka from Syriac maps, if I wouldn't have minimized it. So, what we're seeing is this move out from Opitny in here, which is similar-ish to this map, but is speaking much higher in here along where this borderline sits in here. But situation Avdiivka front, Russian army continued to advance to the urban area of the city, reaching the railroad and driving Ukrainian army off the bridge south of the coke plant. This, of course, railroad runs down through here. The moment is not At the moment, it is not possible to speak about the capture of the bridge as the fighting continues in summer cottage areas. These are dashes. Meanwhile, in the south, Russian troops took control over Hill 218 northeast of Opitny, which leaves Ukrainian troops deployed in the former Air Defense Missile Battalion in a semicircle situation. The situation of the Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka is precarious. as only one supply line to the city remains, which is under direct fire control of the Russian artillery. So speaking that they have advanced much further here in the north and that this supply line is under direct fire. Now, I've seen people say online who obviously have no military experience that are being under, direct fire line. This isn't a problem due to the ISR. They can move at night. On a battlefield like this, there are drones in the air 24/7, thermal, night vision, day vision, bloody cameras. Everything that moves in here is seen. This is why this whole area is just an absolute meat grinder of people. And having a supply line under direct fire is not a great thing. And we've spoken about there's only about 5 kilometers between here, maybe less, that many, many weapons can easily reach out and touch that gap. Coming in and out is going to be a huge problem. And of course, then supply in and out is going to be a huge problem. Medivac, as of course, with how flat it is here, with the only bit of high ground really that Russia has gotten in the east, that this is turning into an out of control situation fairly quickly. The decision time of the Ukrainian command to withdraw the troops from there is running out. And if the dynamics of these last days continues, we could see a huge amount of prisoners and a strong blow to the Ukrainian morale that would lose its biggest fortress in the eastern front. We know this is an absolute fortress of Avdiivka. This is why it will take a long time to fall. But if we do see that this is then completely cut off, we know there's a hell of a lot of troops in this area that may get caught on the way out or will be taken prisoner. And of course, that is a huge loss as well. So what he's saying is the speed that we've seen Russia advance through here, how quickly will they continue through these areas? Now, we know that it will slow down, but it will be interesting to see exactly how this then further unfolds. Now, to the south of here, Novomaylivka, there is no change shown on this map. There's been a lot of discussion about what is happening down here, with both sides claiming that they have got more control of ground, but no maps are really showing or reflecting this as a whole, at least of a lot of ground. So southwest of Donetsk, followed by an intense bombardment of the Russian army, restarted the assault to Novomaylivka and managed to enter in the eastern part of the locality. It's still premature to say that the final battle for the village has begun, as the Ukrainian situation in the area is not so compromised, as the semi-encirclement of Novomaylivka is not well developed. So of course, just saying they've got this little area here on the outskirts of Novomaylivka, and what they're saying is this semi-encirclement here isn't really that developed. And that is true. It's not like we see up further in Avdiivka. We can just see the cut in here isn't that great. So it's still going to be a hell of a fight. No movement up in Bakhmut, but where we then will move is up here into this Terny-Yampolivka front, where if we stay back in a couple of days, we do see that Russia has expanded its control in the direction of Yampolivka and Terny. And this is then reflected from the Surak maps. Here, situation North Donetsk, Russian army continued advancing towards Terny and Yampolivka. There is no truth that Russian troops entering in both localities, as clashes continue between 1.5 to 2 kilometers east of there. And we did measure this yesterday, that we do know it's about 2 kilometers that this is sitting from Yampolivka and Terny, depending, of course, where you bloody measure from. But it is, there will be claims that they've entered these regions and there is nothing, no geolocations, nothing to then back that up. Of course, Russia is looking to make it west up to these areas and create then that natural barrier. But legends, that is all that I have for you today. If there was a lot of cuts in this, I just can't speak today. I think I've got too much on my plate. But look after yourselves and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye-bye.